I am Optimus Prime, leader of the Autobots. We have lost the transwarp key and with it our ability to go home, but we have gained an ally in our battle against the forces of evil, forces too powerful for any of us to defeat on our own, but together we might just have a chance. Here's your look at the brand new Threezero Transformers Rise of the Beast DLX Optimus Prime. Transformers Rise of the Beast brings us the 7th chapter in the Transformer film saga, taking place in the 90s, where the Autobot leader Optimus Prime unites with new allies in order to face their biggest enemy yet. Transformers Rise of the Beast DLX Optimus Prime continues the high-quality craftsmanship of the DLX series, introducing new elements and details, faithfully reproducing his updated design and arsenal from the film. Optimus is about to meet a primitive Prime, but before he does, I'd like to go ahead and thank the folks first over at Threezero that did provide this sample of the Transformers Rise of the Beast DLX Optimus Prime that we could have a look in this review. The figure is slated to release the 4th quarter of 2023. Anybody looking currently at their calendar will realize he should start to drop soon. He's on pre-order on many of the online sites for $229.99 or about $230. Rise of the Beast Optimus Prime stands, though, 11 inches in height, or it's going to be about 28.5 centimeters tall. Now, we have in fact looked at a very similar looking Prime before from Threezero. Here's what the Optimus Prime from Rise of the Beast looks like from Optimus Prime Bumblebee. You can see like a lot of the same elements are carried over, and though while looking at it, it doesn't look like there's a lot of the same mold elements carried over, there are still about the same sized figure. Speaking though of Rise of the Beast, also we just recently had a look at the DLX Bumblebee and scaled, I think, appropriately to the way that Optimus Prime is in the movie. Optimus Prime should be a taller figure when you compare him against Bumblebee, and the same thing can be said as well when we look at these Threezero releases. I guess just before we actually look at the figure's accessories, we'll look at the display stand and the instruction manual that comes included with Optimus Prime. First, the manual. The manual is always good to, first of all, tell you exactly where you have to install the batteries. The batteries, in fact, have to be installed in 2 places, the ion blasters and Prime's eyes, and it does cover the territory nicely on both. You do require, though, AG13 batteries, 2 for each of the individual blasters, then 2 for Prime's eyes, giving you a total of 6, and it also as well shows you all the different posability points on the figure that we'll be covering off shortly. As always usually the case when we get these DLX releases also from Threezero, you get also gifted as well a display stand. This seems to be the same stand that we've gotten with the other DLX releases from at least the Transformers territory. It does have this time around, though, printed in blue, Transformers Rise of the Beast and Threezero just above that. Some assembly was required. I did have to take the neck, and always the case, you have to plug it in right here and plug it in at the back here. That does then gift you some additional posability. You can bring the neck back and forth to lock it in any one given spot. Just lock the latch down, and it's not going to be moving anywhere. You can also as well extend the neck, and you can also take the end piece and rotate it back and forth. It doesn't freely move on its own simply just because it sits against the teeth of its riveted points. So you have to kind of pull it away, move it to where you want to have it, and then plug it back in place. Prime does, though, have a section on the back of the figure's body. There is this little tab piece that you have to pull out here, and then the back display stand literally just plugs into that. I haven't yet really displayed any of my Threezero releases with the display stand attached onto their body, just because I don't know, just the idea of Prime flying through the air, unless he has pieces of jet fire attached to him, just doesn't make as much sense to me. But if you wanted to, you really could put this guy in a dynamic pose, especially swinging the axes that he comes included with. I say axes plural, but you do technically get 2 axes, even though it really, I suppose, is going to be only just 1 axe. 1 axe, even though I did have 2 displayed at the opener end of this review. 1, though, as you can see, is cast here in a very nice silver plastic with some additional wear and tear and weathering added to the blade itself. Some additional blue highlights have been also added in there as well, but you also get this version too, which is, I'm imagining, the same one, and it would just be one that actually is illuminated here. So even though really I did have the figure displayed with both, you probably will only really want to have the figure displayed with one of them. But this one does have now additionally added some translucent orange plastic, and boy, does that ever look nice. The rest of the axe, though, is exactly the same as the first one we started looking at. Just, again, the only thing different is adding these additional pieces. The teeth are something that running your finger across it is not necessarily going to be cutting you, but it does feel a little on the more sharper side. The axes also do come included with hands for holding. Now, Prime does come included with 2 gripping hands. One thing about the hands, though, is that you'll see that the thumbs are pretty in close quarters with the additional 4 fingers below that. So getting the axe actually in his hand is a little trickier to do. I found it actually was helpful, just because, again, the plastic is as soft as it is, to kind of pry the thumb away. And then once you get really the handle part of the axe around the thumb, this is, again, the hardest thing to do. Maybe it's actually a little bit easier if we just slide it. There we go. Once you get it really past the thumb, you can kind of hook it in there. It still is sitting loose, though. So unfortunately, like when Prime holding it, unless you really then heat the hand in hot water, or you can also, I'm sure, probably use a hairdryer, you could bring then the fingers back closer to the palm. And you might actually get, if I turn this around, you might actually get a bit more solid or sturdier grip to hold onto the axe. Ironically enough, though, as we actually look at the other things the figure comes included with for hands, Prime also comes included with a hand that looks to belong to Bumblebee. And yet, if you look actually at the instructions, I'm just going to bring this back here for a second, you get 2 weapon-holding hands, a command hand for left hand, relaxed hands, and spread hands. There is no mention at all, in fact, of actually including a Bumblebee hand. And my only guess is this is, again, going to be tying in then to the Bumblebee that we already had a look at from Rise of the Beast. So if you want to have the figure displayed, say, for example, with the axe, they basically have given you then a hand for Bumblebee. Just strange, though, it's not listed anywhere on the packaging. The other hands, as already covered, is the fact that he comes with gestured hands. Those are always nice to have displayed with Optimus Prime. There's no real posability at all on these. They're basically just molded in plastic, but the plastic is fairly soft. So, again, you can move the fingers around a little bit. You don't really even need to move these fingers around because they don't have to try to work around a handle of a weapon. But again, you got some, dynamic gestured hands. Those are always good to have. You get as well a pair of closed fists. I currently have, by the way, the relaxed hands in the forearms of Optimus Prime, but then he also has a command pointing hand, and you can easily then just swap them out with any one of the hands. Changing, by the way, hands out is not at all hard. I mean, you're just going to be literally holding onto the forearm, wiggle the hand and remove it from the provided post, and then you're going to take the hand that's provided here, making sure, of course, thumbs go in, and just plug it back onto the ball joints. Super, super easy. Prime also does come included with, we already covered the axes, but he also as well comes included with his blades. The blades seem identical. I mean, looking at the two, it doesn't look like one is different from the other. Again, you've got a little bit of an additional wash of brown that's been added to the sides of the axe, and of course then you got the Energon blades, nicely done here again in translucent orange plastic. These can plug onto Prime in a very simple way. I'm just going to kind of move everything out of the way. If you look at Optimus Prime's arms, involves me kind of bringing these forward here, you have this section right here on the side of his forearm. You lift this up, and you may want to even just kind of bring the hand down a little bit. You may also even just find it easier just to detach the hand. But the hardest thing I would honestly do is first, I would just kind of keep the hand in there. Just because once you've got the blade in there, you don't have to then worry about trying to get your hand around it to plug the hand back in place. But we're just going to kind of move the hand out of the way. See, there's a slot right there. You're going to take the little peg that's on the end of the Energon blade, and then that slots right in there. It was hard to kind of line everything up initially, but once you've got everything in there and lined up, yep, you're good to go. And again, you can have Prime really displayed with the blades on both the sides. We're probably made not as much sense to really open this review with him actually wielding 2 axes. Having him actually wielding 2 blades makes probably a little bit more sense. The figure also comes included. Let me just take this back out from his hand. He doesn't come included with a signature gun, but what he does come included instead with is these ion blasters. This involves actually one bit of assembly on your part to include the AG-13 batteries. Now, the AG-13 batteries aren't something that gets packed with Threezero when you first buy Prime for yourself. You have to kind of go out of your way and buy the AG-13 batteries yourself. I did actually just buy a tray from Amazon. I bought 2 trays, if memory serves me correctly, and it set me back like $15. But I've got, I want to say like 24 batteries or maybe like 18 batteries. I'm literally good for a while, so I've really nothing to worry about. Now, the assembly for this, without getting down to actually unscrewing the entire apparatus, you'll take this piece right here, the longest of all the parts around it, and you just kind of detach this, wiggle it back and forth because you really don't want to fight this. And then right there, there's a screw that you're going to unscrew, and then this whole section, this part beyond, basically just detaches. It kind of looks like an old spaceship we would see from a futuristic movie. Anyways, you're going to be taking like this part on, and you're going to detach it, and inside is the battery chamber that's going to store the two AG13 batteries. Once that's installed, you're going to put this back in place, you're going to screw that back in place, and then you're going to take the piece. And if you look at the back here, it has a little L. Line it up with the raised L that's on the outside here, and just line everything up and plug it back in place. There are a few little pieces like this one here, for example, that keeps falling off for me. You'll see that there's a little slot. I think it's probably just a little bit weaker glue that they've used here. I'm just going to, you might see me, in fact, actually doing this a couple of times in this review, but this basically just slots in place. You take the little slot, see the little groove right there? It's almost made in a way that it looks like it should have really come off, but I think it's actually just a little bit of glue that's a little bit weaker in that point. Now, this is a hair trigger. It does actually have, I'm just going to leave this actually off for right now, because I'm just going to want to rotate this. It does have a hair-sensitive trigger to this. What you're going to do is you're going to press this in. You can also sometimes rotate this, and this also turns it on too. I don't know how many times I was putting this back into the tray box, and I accidentally turned this on. It may be a good idea that if you decide you don't want to have Prime displayed with the ion blasters, probably take the batteries out. First of all, so the batteries don't actually drain. And second of all, just because you don't accidentally want to have this turned on, and when you put this away, you're not even going to be any bit the wiser. But there's two functions. One, again, is just well, you can see it was a steady light. Now we've got sort of a pulsating light. It looks really, really good. Now, I was doing this only by just turning it this way, back and forth. The real idea is you actually will press this. Press it on to pulsate it. Press it on to press it to turn it off, and press it again for a steady light, or, you know, obviously in a different order. But honestly, just like even rotating alone, the trigger on this is so hair sensitive. Even just touching it slightly involved this me actually turning this on. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just put this piece back in, because again, like the other ion blaster, I didn't have any real problems with it, but it's just this one section. I really could have easily just glued this prior to hitting the record button. But I thought, you know what, I would talk about at least some of the things I'm having problems with my Optimus Prime. They're very minor problems. More the bigger problem is unfortunately trying to attach the ion blasters to Optimus Prime's arms. So you get two of these. And when you're supposed to attach them onto Prime, I'm going to show you what I've been trying to do. You're going to wiggle the hand and take it off from, of course, the provided peg. If you look at the ion blaster, on the inside, you've actually got yourself a hole right there, and then you've got a peg that's just above that. If you look at his arm, though, he has a ball joint right here, obviously where his hand once was. And then if you look at the inside where we did put the energy blade from before, there's a little opening right there. So for all intents and purposes, that slot and that peg hole that peg should actually fit right then into the shapes lined up here on the side. Unfortunately, though, any little bit of pressure putting this against Prime's hand has resulted in me popping pieces off, and it never really stays like it should never. It never really feels, honestly, like it's staying properly in place. And especially on this one, I keep popping this piece off in the process. Now, there is an L and an R, left and right, obviously. I don't think necessarily, as long as this piece is really the piece that's sticking out, I don't think there's a specific plan to have one on one side and one on the other. Because if you look at them, they're basically the same configuration. It's just, you know, again, like this is the part that spins, but it looks like they're pretty much like the same sort of configuration. But still, I have the problem. I can't line up properly to get the peg or the ball joint actually in there to lock this in place. Any bit of pushing against this, I feel like with the nature of these just being more softer pieces or more brittle pieces, I want to apply a lot of pressure to it. I really wish there was a simpler way to attach the ion blasters. Even if there was a hook, even if there was like a magnet, something here on the side that could have maybe clipped onto a Prime's arm, because there really isn't a way that I can find an easy way. It's just going to bring Prime again closer so you can see his arm. Like, there's the ball joint, right? There's the slot. And there's the hole, and there's the little peg at the top there. So, again, for all intents and purposes, it should line up like this. They even, in fact, actually, I mean, if I want to make sure I've got everything lined up here, yeah. If you look at the top, see there's a half circle shape that even literally lines up to this piece on the top of his forearm. And yet, I can't get everything on there. I'm going to keep fiddling, of course, around with that, but that's one big frustration I have with Prime, is that I can't properly attach the ion blasters. It doesn't mean that they're not possible, but it means maybe I'm not applying enough pressure to actually get them on there. I can kind of just rest them on there, but I know long term that's not going to stay properly in place. The other last battery compartment, as we kind of turn, I want to make sure I've turned these off because I don't want to have them running the whole time in this review. Switch that off, switch that off. The other battery compartment, of course, is in Optimus Prime's head. That's an easy thing to actually get, because I noticed with his neck, it's very easy to remove. The headpiece, as I show you this, a close-up look of it, the battery compartment, in fact, involves you only just to wiggle Prime's top temple back and forth till eventually this comes off. And in the instructions, sometimes they're basically just a case of like telling you, okay, lift this piece, but lifting it may not always be the easiest thing to do. I actually found it was a lot easier to kind of wiggle it back and forth, and as I was wiggling, I was kind of pulling it up. There we go. There's the two AG13 batteries properly housed inside of Prime's inside head. And then there's also, again, the little button here on the front. But if you line everything up accordingly, what will end up happening is when you press the front of his head, it'll also light up his eyes. So you don't have to lift the top of his cranium every single time, and it illuminates a very nice bright blue. It's very similar, in fact, to the Prime that we did get from before for Transformers Bumblebee. It does also have two different mouth plates. There's this one, and one that was just off to the side. I kind of kept everything kind of, well, where did I put everything? The other mouthpiece, it's right over here. It was actually covered by one of the ion blasters. To change out the mouth guard on Optimus Prime, even though, all honestly, I really do like the mouth guard as it is right now. But if you wanted to change it, first of all, let's not continue to drain the batteries inside of Prime's head. Let's also, as well, remove the head from the neck. To get to the mouth guard, it's just a case of actually taking it and pulling it away from his face. Again, you can kind of wiggle it in the same way that we were removing the top of his head, but you want to basically pull it off, and you'll see on either side of Prime's mouth guard, there's a peg there and a peg there that lines up then with the holes on either side of his face. Take the mouth guard and take the face plate, I should say, and when you're putting it in, you want to make sure that the nose is upright, because I had at one point faced it around the other way, and it does work the other way, but it makes Prime's face look a little weird. So you line everything up, plug that back in place, and now Prime's got himself a mouthpiece. I don't honestly like this. I just don't think it necessarily works for Prime. I've always been a bigger fan myself of having Prime with a mouthpiece or mouth plate across the front of his face. I mean, it's there as well if you want it, but it's not one that's going to ever be displayed with the figure. So I'm just going to pull that back off, put back in, I feel, the better looking mouth plate. There we go. And now we got Prime again looking certainly more classic cartoon design. Just to spin this around so you guys can see the finer features and finer details on Prime's head. Once again, Threezero has done a really nice job of it. I mean, it loses a little bit of it. It has a bit of a dead eye look to it unless you actually turn on the lights. But a really nice head sculpt nonetheless. We're going to go ahead and take the head and put it back onto the neck. The earlier Prime that we looked at from Transformers Bumblebee had basically the same neck configuration, where the neck was a separate piece, because it works on also its own independent ball joint. I've noticed with this Prime, though, the head is a little bit more prone to popping off. Even just moving the head back and forth, I find myself always freeing the neck from the torso. As we get a closer look, though, at Optimus Prime's body, there's a lot more gray added to this character that wasn't the case before. Let's sort of hold on one second. I'm just going to put the fist back in. It looks a little out of place, not Prime having an actual hand on both sides. Let's just put Prime once again down here. I'm going to grab the Optimus Prime from Transformers Bumblebee. I mean, a more classic-looking Optimus Prime was this one right here, because it had more red for the calf section of his torso. The legs were about the same. The lower legs would also be in the blue, about the same. But this Prime introduces some additional gray in his torso. Not something I thought I was really going to like, but now seeing it actually more as a figure and less like something I was seeing on the screen, I actually do think the gray works a lot better for Optimus Prime. It kind of brings everything together nicely, because again, you got the gray for the tops of his thighs, you got the gray as well in the bicep sections and the section for the top of his body. There's definitely a lot more contrasting colors as opposed to just simply all red here for the Prime that we looked at before. We're just going to move that one out of the way. I'm sure I'm probably going to be bringing that Prime back in as we wrap up things. But as we pick the figure back up, once again, getting a closer look at the figure there. Now, there is no removal or opening section here for the front of his torso. One other thing I also noticed with my Prime, at least, is the flap that is on the top of this particular windscreen is very prone to popping off. It's just a case of popping it back in place. But you got Prime in more the classic looking blue head sculpt. Of course, he has the Autobot insignias on either sides of his shoulders and some really nice, very intricate detailing. As we spin the figure around, you can see it's very clean from all the sides. It benefits also one of the things too with the Transformers from Threezero is the fact that they don't transform, so they can certainly make them a lot more movie accurate. And there's a lot of posability as well that we're going to cover off the territory for in a second. He has the skirting there on the front. This will also help down the road as we look at the posability to also free the leg section up so you're not going to be clipping these in the process. One thing that's also introduced differently here with this version of Prime is whereas the other one before only had the blue knees, now he also has some additional lights there on the fronts of his knees. The lower half of his legs, again, classic looking Prime. The tires are rubber from what I can see, and you can also bring them out as well. Bringing them too far out, do remove them. But I noticed just for the aesthetic of the figure, I kind of like to bring the tires just a little bit more so they're not flush against really the sides of his legs. And again, the lower half, you can see the underside of Optimus Prime's feet, sporting, of course, the Threezero logo printed on the foot, at least only on one of the legs. I'm just kind of spin this around again so you guys can see all again the really intricate detailing that they've done to the actual figure itself. Now, his posability is going to be retained from the Prime that we looked at before. I don't think they necessarily have introduced anything new to this Prime that wasn't already present on the earlier Prime from Transformers Bumblebee. So his posability is going to be the same. He has a ball joint in the head. It allows the head to rotate all the way around. It's going to be obviously getting to a point where it's going to say, well, you really don't want to turn it any more than what it is right now. But for all intents and purposes, you should be able to rotate the head all the way around. Now, the neck also does have its own ball joint, but though moving it up and down as much as I have, every once in a while I find myself kind of removing the neck from the body. It's just a case of plugging it back in place. Now, the shoulders rotate. If I can just bring the shoulders out here, the arms rotate all the way around. You can also as well bring the arms outward. This section right here for Prime's torso actually does have a crunch, or it does have a swiveling point. So if I spin this around to the back so you can see what I'm doing here, if you take Prime's arms, for example, there goes the windshield. I knew that was going to be a piece that was going to fall off. We're going to have to go and retrieve that. But these, yeah, do come forward like this. So if you want to have more Prime with a lunging look for the front of his body, you can do that. See how this is just undetached right here? It basically just slots back in place. If anything, if I find this is too much of a nuisance, I might just find myself kind of gluing in some of these pieces. I didn't glue it prior to this review just because, again, I wanted to kind of point out that some of the problems I have with this Prime, but again, if only the part problems that I have outside the ion blasters are things that every once in a while are just going to fall off of them, I can easily just plug those back in place as well. Now, when it comes to his arms, the way they've actually designed the smokestacks here on his arms is that they actually independently hinge. So when you bring his arms out, for example, the smokestacks do a nice job of actually staying out of the way. Also, in addition to that, Prime does have a bicep swivel, so you can rotate the arm that way. He does also have a double hinge on the elbow. He has a hinge right here that's sort of concealed in his bicep, and then he has a secondary hinge right here at the end of his elbow. The figure also has no swivel in his forearm, but you can at least rotate his hands back and forth. Now, as for his upper torso does have a very leaning forward crunch. The crunch itself really does give, and even further than that, there's actually two hinges for the crunch. It does give Prime a really low look. I mean, you're probably never going to really be displaying Optimus Prime looking low like this, but the fact that they incorporate that much articulation and don't sacrifice really any of the additional details that they've sculpted in there to make it look movie accurate, really, again, nice work on Threezero's part. Now, he has a swivel right here. This is a ball joint on the top of his torso. Just before we actually move a little bit further, I want to show you guys that he does actually have an Autobot logo on the front of his grill. He also has a swivel at the base of his abdomen. So there's a swiveling section right there as well. So he has two crunch points, a swivel at the top of the torso and a swivel at the bottom by his waist. Now, in order to move his legs, you kind of want to make sure that you move these skirting sections out of the way. Just because, again, like if you bring the legs out, for example, I want to make sure I've got these all kind of out as much as I can get them. Yeah, if you bring the legs out, for example, he does have the means to really technically split, but with the side skirting, you want to make sure that you don't knock those off in the process. Prime's legs do go as well forward at about almost 90 degrees. He does have a swivel slightly at the tops of his thighs. The figure does also have a double hinge on his knee, which is real. I mean, look at the range just on that alone. And then the figure also has articulation here in the ankle. Now, the ankle's a little harder and a little tighter on my figure. It does move back and forth this way. And Prime's feet also move back and forth this way with some much appreciated as well toe articulation. All in all, it's basically just an upgrade essentially to the Transformers Bumblebee Optimus Prime. The same can really be as well said when we looked at Optimus Prime in the movie too. I mean, the design that they had basically that was a carryover really from Transformers Bumblebee. We're going to bring back in that Bumblebee Optimus Prime so you guys can see. Threezero once again has delivered a really good looking Optimus Prime. You know, while I really was a big fan of this one, and it still is one that shines on my shelf, I gotta say, like, the additional gray added to the torso, while first seeing it in the film, I sort of thought, maybe that's too much gray. Maybe we need to stick with more red for Optimus Prime's body. I gotta say, like, the gray is a nice thing that adds a little bit of a breakup. It kind of brings more attention to the top of his torso where his windshields would be. Whereas, again, like when you had Prime before with all the red, it just made him a little more bulkier, if that made any sense. And, of course, we can also bring back in Bumblebee. Bumblebee scales, again, always nicely with Optimus Prime, whether you already have still the original Transformers Bumblebee, or you have the new one, or the new one that we are going to be getting, at least, from Rise of the Beast. I feel there's enough, again, upgrades that even if you had the original Transformers Bumblebee, there's enough that's been changed. First of all, Prime doesn't have his classic ion gun. Instead, he swaps them out for ion blasters, which is the only thing, outside of a few little things that were popping off on my version of the Prime. Having those ion blasters not properly clip in place is about the only other thing I wish they could have improved. They proved really nicely. Just let's move Bumblebee out of the way. They've done such a nice job to improve the overall aesthetics of Optimus Prime and the outer design of him. I kind of wish that they could have found a way to find a better way to incorporate the ion blasters than simply just clipping them onto the ball joints on the ends of his forearms. Other than that, though, I'm really happy with how this one turned out. It is a nice upgrade to the original one we got from before. While I may have started this review with Optimus Prime holding Energon axes, and in retrospect I probably should have realized just having displayed with one was more than enough, we are wrapping up the reviews now with him displayed with the Energon swords. Unlike, though, the axes that had to be held in his hands, the Energon swords, on the other hand, easily slot on the sides of his forearms, which unfortunately the same could be said for his ion blasters. Still is one problem I'm having with this figure is trying to attach those ion blasters. They're supposed to slot the same way as the swords, and they're supposed to attach onto the area where his hands normally would be. But with everything being self-contained with the ion blasters, it's so easy to change a hand because you know how much tolerance you can put against the hand with no risking of breaking anything off. With these Energon or ion blasters being all basically a shell, you're trying your best to put a pressure against it enough to attach onto the ball peg without pushing too much pressure against it that it's going to be breaking any of the plastic. Because again, it's a very brittle plastic, certainly something that you're not going to be wanting to put a lot of pressure against. I might try to go back and heat it maybe with a hairdryer, the inside, enough to soften up the socket, and maybe that might be a little bit more easy to glide in the ball joint. But as it is right now, I think there really should have been an easier way for Threezero to incorporate the ion blasters, whether it be magnets, whether it been just something that clipped more onto the side of his form and relied less on something you couldn't see. It's the only thing I wish they could have done differently with Optimus Prime, as it certainly goes for his design, while having basically the same body as the Transformers Bumblebee Prime that we looked at from before. Like in the movie, they did as aesthetically change some of the design details for Prime, incorporating so much additional silver than he has in his abdomen area. And I have to say it does actually bring a lot more, even though I'm surprised to say that it actually makes Prime a lot more colorful, when really what I'm looking at is the absence of color with just a whole lot more silver. But I think the silver actually in his abdomen helps to kind of break up the torso that's above it. And while it really is only just his windscreen top of his torso and his arms that are the red, I think it actually works a little bit better for this Optimus Prime than the all red top torso that was more the classic look for Optimus Prime that we got in Transformers Bumblebee. If you guys are interested and would like to get your hands on the brand new Transformers Rise of the Beast DLX Scale Collectibles Series Optimus Prime, he is slated to release once again the fourth quarter of 2023, and most of the online sites have their pre-order with the price point of $229.99 or $230, which again, for what we're getting for Optimus Prime, considering he illuminates not only in the eyes but the ion blasters, considering that he is made of mostly metal, he is a really, again, well worth picking up if you are a big fan of what Threezero has been doing with the Transformers property. Don't put this guy to rest. Don't write him off simply just because he doesn't transform. Because again, what they're doing with Transformers, if you can overlook the fact he doesn't transform, he's a much better looking piece because he doesn't have to hide all the bulk of all of the parts when he transforms from one mode to robot. A big thank you once again to the folks over at Threezero that did provide the sample of Transformers Bumblebee or Transformers Rise of the Beast Optimus Prime that we could have a look in this review. If you guys enjoyed this video, want to hit with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing, and you certainly would like to stick around for more, if you haven't already done so, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and you're turning on as well the bell notification. If you also want to check out some of the other reviews I've done for Threezero, specifically even Transformers, popping up also at the very end of this video will be a playlist for other things I've looked at from Threezero, with many more to follow. And of course, as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.